is the opening. And today's show is a little bit different in the sense that obviously a lot of that is questions.
And good afternoon and happy Friday. Yes, I am the insider. Hey everyone, this is Steve Ferreira and I'm CEO of Ocean Audit and Chairman of Ocean Freight TV. And welcome to another great edition of Ocean Freight TV. Today's version, the insider. You know, it's funny, I wanted to kind of take the gloves off and contribute a little bit back to those that have been so good to me. You know, I think that having incredible 40,000 outlier hours of industry expertise allow me to make calls that are unprecedented in terms of how they can help the beneficial cargo owner in the important aspects of invoicing, finances, invoice control, supply chain management, procurement, directives, incredible opportunities for refund recovery and cost avoidance. You know, this is a subculture of the industry that you really have to be a superhero to navigate. So not only am I the insider, you know, I like to take the dimensions that I'm bringing in the market, incredible new opportunities of gain sharing ideas, industry secrets, and initiatives that can help you be better stewards of your company's funds and manage your import and exports departments extremely well. In fact, be able to command excellence with your C-level executives and bring them the recovery or the remuneration of working capital that they richly deserve in being executive stewards of the company's financial directives and futures. You, of course, as logistics men and women, for my logistics friends that are watching this, you're playing the part of directing and orchestrating all of this. Whether you know it or not, you play such a huge role in contributing back to the financial stewardship of the organization. You know, it used to be in the days of COVID, where we would basically just see a kind of a command and control center of moving the product to where it needs to be. Now, after coming back from TPM 23, I see the picture so much clearer, even with someone with 40,000 outlier hours, 40 years in the trade. I see my role now as to share the insider secrets to make you more successful in your role. And that's one of the things that we bring you, or I bring you, as far as the stewardship of Ocean Freight TV, and of course, running the crow's nest here at Ocean Audit. You know, recently I started to look at a whole rebranding initiative. I realized that I've made an incredible faux pas in these last dozen or so years, maybe even 20 years. And so Ocean Audit is a brand. But Steve Ferreira is also a brand. And I think that as we start to look at how I navigate and work with my great clients and friends that are watching our show today, you're really getting, it's not Ocean Audit, it's Ocean Audit by Steve Ferreira, or it's Steve Ferreira's Ocean Audit. There's a subtle difference because you're putting the owner and the outlier expert, you know, with those 40,000 hours, first and foremost in front of command and control units of your company. I did a show yesterday, and it was an incredible show on the joy of logistics with Christoph Schulte, and we talked about how got a great colleague and I should say a peer, not a colleague, but a peer in the industry. And you guys all know Lars Jensen in Copenhagen. Lars is a great person, and probably, you know, one of the top 2 or 3 experts in global containerization. Yet, I think that Lars and I are in the same genre. We're in the same kind of club, the same level. Lars approaches his bailiwick with a technical bent, a line of perfection. I approach mine with creativity, panache, art, science, and the layers that you need to take away as executive men and women to do your role, to service your roles better, and to be more efficient in your stewardship of the company's funds, supply chain directives, and relationships with procurement suppliers such as the Maersks and Evergreens and Schenkers and DHLs of the world. So I look at my role as really unique to what, say, Lars does, when he does a great job analyzing the technical nature of the market. I want to bring you news you can use. And so without further ado, we're kind of taking the brand of Steve Ferreira and we've gone kind of hulky. And this is me, as the Incredible Hulk, and you'll see some other really unique characteristics as we go through our show today. But the first thing I want to do today is I want to unveil part of the layers of secrecy behind detention and demurrage, refunds and recoveries. So today's version of The Insider is really designed to superhero up, if that's the right word, your ability to quickly and safely and securely and professionally manage and work the angles of detention, demurrage, recovery. And boy, there are plenty of those angles at hand. But I want to give you some big picture items that help you to see what we're doing, what I'm doing behind the scenes at Ocean Audit for beneficial cargo owners just like you that are watching the show today. And a great example is taking my Hulk, appearance, or my Hulk approach to this is you take a detention invoice. Let's call it a $10,000 detention invoice that you get in today. So one of the things that's unknown by much of the trade is we hear a lot of bandwidth on the FMC will save the day. We're going to get more into it later on in the presentation of Ocean Freight TV today. But you hear a lot about the FMC being the panacea of cost recovery on detention and demurrage. I'm here to tell you, it couldn't be further from the truth in terms of the FMC's approach towards being the salvage or saving grace, a redeemer of detention demurrage when it comes to you, the beneficial cargo owner. So really there are two, maybe three sub-chapters of the defining rules and managing detention and demurrage recoveries or disputes, because there are really a hybrid amount of opportunity here. So let me try to slice and dice and take you through the heart of it. So really there are two entities that you really have to think about in terms of how to manage a ocean freight detention and demurrage invoice. First we have the Uniform Intermodal Interchange Agreement, right, which is the interchange agreement that governs the haulage between your house trucker or trucking company and the terminal / VOCC. And we've got the FMC, of course, as another new intermediary. And then we've got standard refund and recovery practices that are built in to the Ocean Shipping Reform Act and the Traditional Shipping Act as we know it, which allows a 3-year recovery of detention, demurrage, recovery claims, and getting remunerated for overbilled detention, demurrage. But the big one today that we talk about in this first example, and the reason why I want to kind of walk you through this is it's complicated, but I want to make it simple. So when we look at the Uniform Intermodal Interchange Agreement, that gives some very defined facts in terms of how long you have to dispute an invoice, right? And how long you have to receive an invoice from the ocean freight provider. Now, the way the rules are set up right now, you have basically 60 days to get an invoice for, and listen to this, this is really important, for detention, demurrage, chassis use, storage. That's right, detention and demurrage. So you have 60 days from the date the equipment is returned to get an invoice on any of those modes. 60 days from the date the equipment's returned to the ocean terminal by the trucking provider under the and I'll say the shortcut, the UIIA rules, right? The Uniform Intermodal Interchange Agreement rules. Now, you also have 30 days from receiving the invoice to, once you have the invoice, whatever the invoice comes in, you have 30 days to, if you want to dispute that, you send it back in, and the ocean vendor has 30 days to respond to that dispute, right? That's the key metric in terms of the dispute process, where you have that time frame, 30 days from the date of receipt. I'm just double checking my rules as I see it here, and I'm confirming that that's the case, right? So you have 30 days from when you return it to dispute the invoice. Now, in the example that I've given above, right, we've done a whole bunch of these. And you take a $10,000 invoice. Now, one of the things that you can do, right, to ensure yourself a heads up or an advantage is you can dispute the invoice in, say, seven different ways. You can ask the ocean vendor or terminal operator for more information. You can ask the vendors to provide attachments, such as time-stamped nomenclature related to the invoice itself. And remember, you can also look at when the clock started. You can ask for timestamps of those mechanics. And they're all designed to delayer, right, the dispute process in your favor, right? So if you just send a dispute in, and say, I disagree with this, all the vendor has to do is say, billed is correct, billed is agreed, and that's their rebuttal. But if you break it down into 7 different disputes, part 1, part 2, part 3, it's a very intriguing way because they have to respond 30 days once they get, say, a FedEx packet that you dispute it. The clock starts ticking. And what you can do is by layering the disputes, sending disputes on a Monday, on a Tuesday, on a Wednesday, or on a Thursday. Remember, you're structuring these disputes in 7 different ways, asking 7 different questions. The ocean vendor must respond to that dispute within those 30 days. Otherwise, you don't owe the charge. That's right. You don't owe the charge. And that's the beauty of this hybrid dispute management process that is set up through the UIAA rules, and it works like a charm. We've had 10 examples where we've tested this. All the charges have been dropped, and it's just an amazing opportunity to, and again, now I understand where some of you might be thinking, well, isn't this just a way to kind of paper the ocean vendor? Not at all, because if you think about it, right, the FMC on post invoices from June 22nd, June 16th, 2022 onward, these invoices have to be formatted properly. The FMC's mandated that they must have 10 different formatting, coding and statements. A container free date, the container number, the applicable detention tariff, the rules, whether it's calendar days or business days or working days. This all has to be delineated. And if that's not delineated according to the FMC, then the ocean vendor, terminal operator, loses the right to collect those charges as well. So far we're really doing well here and looking at a complete way to take high-value detention invoices that may have some defects, either the way they're written, in their nomenclature, such as the timing. Something may not look right in terms of the free days. Something may not look right in terms of the rate that's denoted. And so these are all opportunistic ways to write a statement. Compute to me how you achieved at the rate of $150 a day. Compute to me show me the gate ticket that was stamped out on March 1st at 7:35 a.m. They can't produce it, the time's going to keep ticking. And you're going to be able to drop 20, 30, 50, and so on, $1,000 in cost avoidance because you're following the rules. These are not, we're not doing an end around here. We're not it's not like some video game, right, where I found an Easter egg or a cheat code, right? That's the word I'm looking for. These are real techniques that have been designed and developed and agreed upon. Just that, guess what? Nobody really knows about them. Nobody really talks about them. So it's really amazing when you look at the opportunities to recover or reduce charges. The world is your oyster, and not only is the world is your oyster, the world's totally on fire. And when you look at that, you look at the fact that, holy cow! I mean, detention recovery, it becomes quite simple. It becomes quite bountiful in terms of how you do it for yourself versus how you might say the FMC is trying to get you to do it. I look at the FMC in terms of what they're trying to do with their so-called charge complaints as kind of a one and done, right? It's very finite in terms of what a dispute might be through the FMC in terms of a charge complaint. Much more paperwork, and you're talking about much more low-yielding fruit here as opposed to taking the initiative of doing it the way that I proposed it. So when you look at the world's on fire, it really kind of is, in the sense that you're getting a little bit of a false narrative from the FMC approach. Now, one of the things that's really interesting is that the UIAA, the Uniform Intermodal Interchange Agreement, has a lot of weight behind it. And that's always been where traditionally the ocean vendor has sent the detention invoice to the truck line or the interchange operator. Now, Maersk is trying to do a little bit of a switcheroo here. And I wonder, at first I thought, oh, that's really interesting. It's cool. They're going to go right out to the beneficial cargo owner and avoid invoicing the trucker. How nice is that, right? Because, the trucker argument was that getting the invoices from detention to the truckers is always a little bit confusing, right? Because maybe the trucker doesn't pass it on quickly enough, or maybe they hold on to it, maybe it causes aging problems. So Maersk said, okay, no problem, we'll switch it over to the beneficial cargo owner, to the consignee. And then they made a little bit of a asterisk with that, saying, well, if the consignee really wants us to still send it to the trucking operator, the motor carrier, under the UIAA, will still do that. But I think that Maersk may have, and again, I have no knowledge of this because I'm not inside Maersk operations, but could Maersk have done this in a way to circumnavigate, the 30 and 60 day, rules, where if they don't get an invoice in 60 days, you can negate the invoice, and if you dispute it and don't hear back in 30 days, you can negate the invoice. Was Maersk trying to avoid having the invoices run under the UIAA rules? I don't know. Again, it's anyone's guess in terms of how that could morph itself. But I do know that if you look at holograms tell a great story, and Hologram Man is part of my rebranding, where I'm everywhere, right? And I'm everywhere, even though I'm a solopreneur. My idea here is to be everywhere for you, the BCO. And I think when you beam down on the Uniform Intermodal Interchange Agreement, it's a great tool that gives you a lot of real-time flexibility in both avoiding the charges if you don't get the invoice in time, and if you want to dispute the invoice. And I think the disputing the invoice is very strategic, right? And again, it's not that you want to dispute a $100 invoice or $150 invoice, but why not look at, and again, big ticket invoices, they're always worth disputing, because there's so many different touch points on an invoice at $10,000 versus say $150. They definitely become worth investigating whether your team wants to dispute them or not. Now, I think also, when you navigate these high-ticket detention demurrage invoices, you can always do something that's out of the scope. Remember, a lot of times what we're talking about here in terms of perfecting an invoice is we keep going back to the Ocean Shipping Reform Act effective date, which was in June 16th, 2022. So all invoices after that date, tend to have the two things associated with them, right? You can look at how the FMC designates how an invoice needs to be claused, for example, the 10 or 12 touch points that the invoice needs to include. But you also have the old rules, and they've been established for a decade under the UIAA, right? So you've got a hybrid approach to slice and dice and look at detention and demurrage recoveries like never before, right? I do ocean freight refunds, detention and demurrage refunds. And, the most interesting point that I've made, and I think I say it later on, and it's important to accentuate this now, is in the history of histories, since the FMC started this charge complaint issue where, small BCOs or any BCO can bring a detention issue to the FMC and they can help the BCO investigate it. And really think about it this way. The FMC is looking at it kind of from the legal perspective. Did the vendor break the rule or break the law of OSHRA? And if they did, there's a penalty the FMC would assign, and then the FMC is also saying, okay, on top of the penalty, you can get a refund. Well, that's complicated, right? Because, you and I as man and woman, or man and man, or, entity to entity, we're not in it looking for penalties. We want billing accuracy, billing fairness, and we want refunds or reciprocity if the bill is incorrect. And we're not in the game of moderating, a $20,000 or $200,000 penalty that the American government collects from a VOCC. We really could hardly care about that at all. So the FMC, in terms of refunds, right, has only got about $700,000 in refunds on these charge complaints back to the beneficial cargo owners. And just 2 or 3 days ago, right, I got $60,000 back on a couple of containers, or a couple of bills, excuse me. So I got about 10% in one day versus what the FMC has been working on for months. So I think it's a much kind of ballyhooed, entity. And you know from my LinkedIn posting that I'm definitely not the most supportive of government intervention in something like this, where, as Mr. Insider speaking here today, which is me, you have so much freedom and flexibility to do this all on your own, but hopefully with somebody like myself. And again, as I said in my last bullet point on this particular slide, we can actually go back 3 years in history and use many different techniques and rules to help, recover on the overcharges at hand. And I think that, when you look at the whole issue of detention and demurrage, people don't even realize, at least a lot of companies don't, that you can actually mystery shop or shop for demurrage detention rates. Okay, who's got a better rate this time on detention demurrage? And of course, this is something we want to try to avoid. But, under the rules of detention and demurrage, you pick an entity like Evergreen Lines, right? They have $110 detention quadrant for the first 5 days, and then 150 day 6 onward. CMA 155, and then it goes up to 255. So I mean, if right, and this is kind of a weird thing to say, but if you're going to be in a detention mode, right, because you need extra time at the warehouse, or you're thinking that you're going to have a huge Q3, and the time's going to peak for needing extra storage, and by all means, you should actually consider detention shopping, right? That's a really weird thing to say, but I think it's definitely on the radar scope that I look at. And I think the other thing too is, when you're shopping, right, I know my wife likes to shop for Louis Vuitton or Prada bags, but I've come from the ocean industry, so I'm used to hearing the black bag, right? And, back in the day, in the 70s and 80s, used to be these black bag guys, and they'd come, and this is long before there was crackdowns on, any malpractices in shipping. But, I know guys that, have really benefited well from, having the old, quote unquote, days of shipping. I guess I'll say that's all I'll say about that. But I think that when you look at the black bag today, there is some lack of transparency in terms of whether, for example, detention and demurrage is something for profit. I think that we've tried to explain, or the Federal Maritime Commission has tried to have the position that detention and demurrage should not be for profit, right? These should be, legitimate operational charges that constrain the operations, and they shouldn't be used for gain. Now, I want to unveil something as the insider that I think you'll find fascinating. So let's take a scenario where we have a detention invoice to an NVOCC, right? And then we have the invoice from the NVOCC to the BCO. Now, what happens if the NVOCC, and it happens all the time, what happens if they have preferred terms on, say, detention and demurrage with their VOCC partner, right? So I break it down here. So let's say that for a NAC, which means named account, which is a beneficial cargo owner, in the master contract between NVO and VOCC, let's say they have, the VOCC has given the NVO 10 detention-free days for that NAC. But in the NVO's NVOCC service agreement between the NVO and the NAC, they only give them 7 days. Well, think about it, right? If that extra time accrues, right, the NVO is only getting billed for they're getting the 10 free days, but they're only giving the NAC the 7 free days. So, and the quadrant of charges might be $100 for the NVO and $150 for the NAC, depending on how the NVO and the NAC negotiate that. So what I'm suggesting is that it's something that no one talks about, but detention and demurrage can be used and has been used as a profit maker. And I think that's something that needs to be exposed. And I think it's also a question that needs to be asked by NACs when you're negotiating. Show me your master agreement for my account. And do we have special terms in your service contract, Mr. NVOCC, with the VOCC provider? You have to really level set the playing field. This alone could be worth tens of thousands of dollars to you going forward in the future. And I think it has a lot to do with how we play the hero and the villain. And as you kind of think about taking you through that process, we have to really think that everything that we do is real-time perfection, right? We have to look at real-time dispute management. We have to get the clocks ticking, right? The 30-day clock for disputes, the 60-day clock for receiving an invoice. We have to look at perfecting a dispute in 7 different ways and requesting attachments and timestamps, as opposed to what a lot of BCOs do. The invoice is wrong, please correct it, right? And that gives the vendor the out that says invoice is correct as billed, please pay. So you box yourself in. It's like a fighter, you know, he's on the rings, he's on the ropes, right? And he's just there. He's waiting to be, you know, put into submission. You don't want to be like that in terms of using that analogy with your detention demurrage invoices. You know, I think the one advantage, right, that we've seen come out of the FMC is that their recent rule on improving and perfecting what a detention or demurrage invoice must look like. For example, the total due, the applicable rates, the timing, the time the time the cargo was available, whether they use calendar days or working days, a statement that the charges and the carrier's performance didn't contribute towards the underlying charges. In other words, right, that all the charges accrued because of the client, the BCO, not picking up the container or redelivering the container too late. But the FMC rule actually helps because it does give a substantial out by the hybrid UIAA rules and the new FMC rules, because what's happening is that vendors are delaying the issuance of the detention and demurrage invoice in order to quote unquote perfect it, right? So think about it, right? If you have 60 days to receive a detention or demurrage invoice after the equipment's been returned, you know, you've got probably 5-10 days, maybe even 14 business days where that vendor is potentially perfecting the invoice, right? And now if they don't perfect it right the first time, they lose incredible time frames because then it's issued, then you can dispute it. But by the time you get the invoice, already 15 days, 10 days have passed. So now you only have to worry about another 50 days passing before that invoice becomes moot and void. So it's an incredible opportunity that you're hearing really from an insider to help on cost avoidance. And you know, I am a true believer in what I say. And when you look at believers, you can only believe so much in the media. You know, I asked Sonic Chat ChatGPT to send me 7 headlines on the FMC and their involvement in refunding. And it's really interesting how these are actually 5 different headlines that the FMC is engaging on something substantial, right? FMC takes action to ensure fairness. FMC reports over 700,000 in refunds for ocean freight charges. Well, first off, there ain't no refunds on ocean freight charges, right? They're talking about, again, detention demurrage. And that's a great example how the media obfuscates the real facts of what they're trying to report here. So, I don't believe in anything I read, and especially if I know and have SME expertise on the issue, I'm going to do a show like this. And it was these headlines that really helped to inspire me to help make a great show for you today, to give you some insight. And one of the things that I think is important on a takeaway like this is I'm broad brushing some of the safety rules here in terms of step 1, step 2, step 3 on purpose, right? Because obviously I would love you to call me and have me walk you through this. And I'd love to obviously help you conduct your overall cost recovery. But what I'm saying to you now is something that nobody else has, to my knowledge, has opened up on or even remotely did a show on. So I want you to know I'm breaking new ground as the insider to help you with this. Now, I think that if you look at where we go from here, it's almost like, one of my favorite movies was this movie, The Final Countdown. And you think about kind of the nuclear black box or the football, right, that the president's advisors carry with him. And I think that if you just kind of get in the habit of thinking, okay, my clock's on 30 days or 60 days. So the key points that you want to take away from today's meeting, our episode. And by the way, you've been watching me, Steve Ferreira, CEO of Ocean Audit and Ocean Freight TV, describe insider cost avoidance issues on detention and demurrage. But you really want to use the Uniform Intermodal Interchange Agreements rules on dispute management for the 30-day period. After you send an invoice in for dispute, the clock starts ticking. The vendor doesn't reply in 30 days. You get your charges waived. Now, same thing on getting an invoice for 60 days. You got a 60-day window from the date the equipment was returned to get a detention demurrage invoice. Now, obviously, Ocean Shipping Reform Act take place in June of 2022. Now, we also have periods where we're going on 2023, 2024, and beyond. You can always take your time. If there's not a issue, if there's an issue that you might have forgot to dispute, or an invoice came in that was over 60 days, but yet you forgot about it. It is challenging to go back and say, oh, well, it's been a year, but we never got this invoice in 60 days. It's too late to argue then. But you still have the 3-year rule, statute of limitations, to go back and argue other examples about the detention and demurrage invoice, such as the tier charges. As you know from that example I gave you earlier on Evergreen and CMA. You have different tiers of detention and demurrage depending on how many days the cargo is outstanding. First 5 days, next 5 days, next 3 days, and so on and so forth. So it's really important to know those quadrants and how they're computed to make sure, because one of the things that happens all the time is ocean vendors really mess up just even the straight invoicing on a detention demurrage bill. So you always have that 3-year rule to recover on ocean freight and detention and demurrage. Keep in mind, it's an important point. I have a good friend that's a maritime attorney, and he and I have served on 4 cases at the Federal Maritime Commission. Shout out to Brendan Collins is his name in DC. And one of the things that Brendan writes about and did a great report on this is that people assume that detention and demurrage doesn't have the same statute of limitations as core ocean freight. It does. It's considered part of all the charges that are in that common carrier's operating tariff. So therefore you have the full advantage to dispute that for a prolonged period of time. But what I've given you today as in our final moment as the insider, and I really want to thank you for watching our episode today, is taking advantage of the incredible finessed small movements that I consider, and you'll always hear me talking about this being part art and part science. I think I've given you some of the art and some of the science now to arm your teams with incredible new flex capacitors of information that will supercharge your own growth, both professionally and remuneratively, to help your companies regain and regrow the lost working capital. So from my desk to yours, I remain faithfully yours, and please get in touch with me at stevef@oceanaudit.com. Feel free to reach out to me and connect and follow my content on LinkedIn. Every Friday, you'll see our broadcast on Ocean Freight TV. Thank you again for watching this important new episode of Ocean Freight TV's The Insider. I'm Steve Ferreira. Have a great holiday, great weekend, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.